everyone, and welcome back to another fun-filled lesson of Actual English. I am Jennifer Clyde. Now, so today's topic, we'll get straight to it, is age. We'll practice talking about how old we are. Perhaps you can also talk about how old other people are, such as your friends, your colleagues, or even your family members. But now, just because today's topic is age does not mean that it's going to be a boring lesson, okay? We're going to find out lots of expressions and phrases and even idiomatic expressions, idioms that is, that are related to age. Expressions you can use in the future and to make your conversations a lot more interesting. So, shall we get started? Here we go. Here is today's Actual Talk.
Rachel, I've got to tell you something. I'm quite angry with you. I recently had a big birthday.
How old did you turn?
I turned the big 3-0.
Wow, the 3-0.
That's not a wow. That's a oh no, disaster.
Well, happy belated birthday anyway.
Thank you, at last.
Yeah, at last.
Better late than never.
That's true. I'm sorry that I'm late, but happy belated birthday. Do you feel different now that you're 30?
I didn't even think about it until the day.
Oh.
And then my wife kept saying, "You're 30, how does it feel?" And I was like, first time I just didn't think about it. I was like, it's fine. And she kept saying it. And I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, I'm 30. I haven't changed decades, like, since I turned 20.
That's definitely true.
Oh, it's not a great feeling.
Oh. What were you like in your 20s?
In my 20s? It was a decade of change, I think. At the start of it, single, going to university. At the end of it, married with a baby. So
wow, lots of changes.
Big contrast.
Yeah.
How old are you, Rachel?
I am 26.
Okay,
so
you're still
mid-20s.
young.
I'm only 4 years younger than you.
That's a big 4 years. That's when you go from young to old.
Oh, no. I don't look forward to it.
I'm just kidding. But what were you like when you were a teenager?
When I was a teenager, I was really carefree because my only responsibility was to be a student, right? Yeah, and I was really into sports, so I was really competitive at the same time.
Wow, what kind of sports did you do?
I did field hockey, softball, and also volleyball.
Amazing.
Did you play sports in your teenage years, or?
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of football. Oh. Well, in North America, you call it soccer.
That's true, soccer.
Yes, but the one that you actually play with your feet, football, is I'm a massive, passionate fan of football, and I played a lot when I was younger.
You still play?
I'm thinking about retiring now that I have a baby. But yeah, 30s, 20s, teens, it's just a number, right?
That's true.
Age is what you make it.
Exactly.
All right, here we are. Welcome back, everyone. We just took a listen and a look at today's actual talk between Rachel and Peter. To briefly summarize their conversation, now let's check out what they said. What were they talking about? Of course, since today's topic is age, they were both talking about their age. Now, Peter did mention that he recently turned 30 years old. And of course, Rachel is about 4 years younger than Peter. Now, not only did they just talk about, simply talk about how old they were, they kind of added some details to add fun to the conversation, right? So let's check out how you could do that in the future as well. All right, here we go. In today's actual talk, Peter began by saying, "Rachel, I've got to tell you something." And he says, "I'm angry with you." He's angry? Why? Actually, he was just joking. So he says, "I'm quite angry with you." And he says, "I recently," right, not too long ago, recently had a big birthday. So this is a rather simple sentence. I had a birthday. Recently, meaning perhaps a few days ago, a few weeks ago, quite recently, it was my birthday. But he said, I had a big birthday. So let's check out what that big birthday means, okay? Big basically in this case means a very, very important birthday. Or perhaps as you age. Of course, when you turn 10 years old, it's not such a big birthday. 20 years old. Your 20th birthday is bigger than your 10th birthday. What about your 30th? Bigger and bigger and bigger. So, for example, if you turn a certain age, meaning if you turn older and older, you can say that you had a big birthday. Or perhaps even a big birthday party. Anyhow, he says, I recently had a big birthday, meaning I turned a lot older. Okay, let's check out the conversation. And then Rachel asks, so, how old did you turn? How old did you turn? How old are you now is another simple question asking somebody's age. But you can say, so, how old did you turn? Meaning, how old did you become? Now, Peter says, I turned the big 3-0. Okay, this is interesting. I turned the big 3-0. Of course, you can say, I turned the big 3-0. That's your choice. Let's check out what this means as well. All right, so first of all, he said, I had a big birthday. And then he says, I turned the big 3-0 or the big 3-0. Of course, as you may know, 3-0 or 3-0 refers to 30. That's right. He's just stressing that he has gotten old. So the big here does not mean big in size, but it means old. Okay, the big 3-0, I turned old. I'm old now. I'm 30 years old. Okay? Okay, let's move on and check out the dialogue. Moving on. Now Rachel says, wow, the 3-0. And then Peter says, that's not a wow. Okay, and he says, that's an oh no. What can you tell from this? He says, that's not a wow, that's an oh no. And he says, disaster. Now, of course, we say disaster, but Peter pronounced it as disaster. The A is kind of pronounced differently. It's not a but a rather disaster, disaster. Anyhow, he does not sound too happy. So he's saying, it's not good. I'm getting old. I'm old now. I'm 30 years old. Oh no. It's a disaster, okay? All right, moving on. Now, Rachel says, well, happy belated birthday anyway. Happy belated birthday. Happy birthday is what you can say to someone to wish them a happy birthday, to congratulate them on their birthday. But when would you say this? Happy belated birthday? Let's take a look. Now, belated itself means late or delayed. So, say for example, if you missed your friend's birthday was maybe 2 days ago or a week ago and you just found out, or you forgot but you just remembered. So you say, oh no, I missed your birthday, but happy belated birthday. It means although it has passed, although it is a little late, still happy birthday. So the next time you have a chance to say happy birthday to someone past their birthday, you could say happy belated birthday. All right. Now, moving on to what Peter says afterwards. He, of course, thanks her by saying thank you. At last, meaning finally. And he says, better late than never. Okay, better late than never. Now, this is an idiomatic expression as well. So, better late than never basically means that it is good that it happened, although it is a little late. 늦었어도 그래도 다행인 거죠, right? Better late than never. So you're saying, well, it's a good thing that it happened. It's better than not happening at all. Okay, it's good. It's okay. At least you congratulated me. So basically, better late than never is that it is good that it happened now. It's better than it not happening. Okay, and then Rachel says, I'm sorry. Do you feel different now that you're 30, now that you're 30 years old? Okay, let's check out what Peter said. Now he says, I didn't even think about it until the day. Okay, until the day meaning the day, his birthday. He didn't really think about it. It wasn't a big deal to him. And then he says, and then my wife kept on saying, she said it over and over and over again, you're 30. How does it feel? So this is what his wife said, jokingly perhaps. Hey, Peter, you're 30. How does it feel? And he says, well, it's fine. But she kept saying it, and he thought to himself, oh my goodness, yeah, I'm 30. So this is when he realized that he turned the big 3-0. Now that he's a lot older, that is. And he says, that's not a great feeling. One more time. Once again, he stresses that he is not too happy about having become 30 years old. All right, let's move on. Now, Rachel says, so what were you like in your 20s. Okay, what were you like? She's asking about the past. And he tells us, my 20s, it was a decade of change. A decade itself means a certain time period. Okay, so let's take a look. Decade itself means a period of 10 years. You may all know this. A period of 100 years is, that's right, a century. But a decade is 10 years. So when he says a decade of change, it means, yes, 10 years of many, many changes. All right, so let's get back to the dialogue. And he says, the start of it, single, going to university. He's getting to the details. Now, this is the fun part. If you just said, well, during the past 10 years, there were many changes. Make it simple and fun. It was a decade of change. The start of it, in the beginning, I was single and I was going to university. And then he says, the end, I was married with a baby. All right. So he's talking about the changes that occurred, the changes that happened within that decade, okay? And then Rachel says, wow, lots of changes. And he says, big contrast, big contrast. So contrast is perhaps a difference. So he's saying, yeah, it's totally different, big contrast. And then he asks Rachel how old she is. She says she's 26-year-old, so she's in her mid-20s. And she says, I'm only 4 years younger than you. Okay, you're 30, I'm 26, so I'm 4 years younger than you. But he says that's a big 4 years. In this case, what does that big mean? Of course, I guess you can say size-wise, but he says 26 and 30, there is a big difference, okay? That's a big 4 years. And then he asks what she was like when she was a teenager. Let's see what Rachel said. She says, when I was a teenager. Now keep this in mind. Peter has asked her a question. What were you like when you were a teenager? And then she asks, when I was a teenager. Sometimes in a conversation, yes, it's very nice to repeat the question and then talk about it. It's a lot more interesting and fun and I guess casual. I was really carefree because my only responsibility was to be a student. Okay, so carefree, let's take a look at what that word means. Okay, now free itself is, that's right, you're not imprisoned. Okay, if you say carefree, it means there's no care. Simply put, carefree basically means that you don't have any worries. You don't have any responsibilities. You are free to do whatever you want to do, okay? So she says when she was a teenager, when she was younger, she was carefree because all she had to do was study well in school. And then she says, and I was really into sports, so I was really competitive. She's adding details. And then Peter asks, continuing the conversation naturally, he asks her about the sports she was involved in. So what kind of sports did you do? She says, I did field hockey, softball, and also volleyball. But here, take a look. You can say I played, but instead she said I did field hockey, softball, and volleyball. So you could do a sport. You could play a sport, but also do a sport. Okay? And then she asks, did you play sports when you were younger in your teenage years? And Peter said he enjoyed soccer, or rather football, right? I'm a massive. Massive means gigantic, very big, huge. So he's saying, I'm a massive fan of football. I am a huge fan of football. I'm a big fan of football. I love football, in other words. And then he says, I'm a massive, passionate fan of football, and I played a lot when I was younger. So he's talking about the kind of sport he enjoyed when he was younger. Here we go. Finally, Rachel asks, do you still play? The do is omitted. She says, you still play? And then he says, I'm thinking about retiring now that I have a baby. Okay, so when you retire from something, you just stop doing it. You can retire from work, meaning you can stop working at your job. Anyhow, he's saying maybe, yeah, I should stop stop playing sports now that I have a baby, now that I have more responsibilities. Now I have to take care of my baby, so maybe I won't play sports or as much as before. 30s, 20s, teens, it's just a number, right? I think even in Korean, there's that, I guess, idiomatic expression. It's 나이는 숫자에 불과하다? Something like that. Exactly. That's what it is. It's just a number. 29, 30s, 20s, teens, it's just a number. It's no big deal. And then he says, age is what you make it. Age is what you make it. Basically, he's saying, well, age, it depends on what you think about it. If you're 20 years old and you think, oh, I'm old, then you're old. If you're 50 years old and you think, oh, I'm still young, then you feel young and perhaps you even look young. So age is what you make it. It all depends on how you think. And of course, Rachel ends the conversation by saying, exactly, you're right. Okay, everyone, hope you enjoyed the actual talk. Let's take a listen to it one more time.